In the shadow of roaring hearths and bustling kitchens, medieval Europe reveals a world shaped by fire, flavor, and ingenuity. From the smoky halls of noble castles to the humble cottages of peasants, every meal tells a story of survival, status, and skill. Spices traveled thousands of miles to color sauces and impress guests, while clever preservation techniques ensured sustenance through harsh winters. Communal ovens, portable cauldrons, and carefully tended gardens all played a part in a delicate dance of timing, labor, and tradition. Behind every feast, every humble gruel, lies a hidden choreography of hands, tools, and fire, an intricate system that sustained generations and left an enduring mark on European culinary culture. Step inside these kitchens and discover a medieval world where food was never simple, and every bite carried the weight of history, society, and invention. In the 14th century, the central hearth was the heart of every medieval home, providing both warmth and a place to cook. In peasant cottages across England, northern France, and the Low Countries, the hearth was a simple open fire set into a stone or earthen floor, often surrounded by a low wall to contain embers. Smoke rose through a hole in the roof or a rudimentary chimney if one existed, but ventilation was limited, and households frequently suffered from constant smoke inhalation. Fuel came from wood cut from nearby forests, dried peat harvested from bogs, or charcoal purchased from traveling merchants. In Italy, particularly in Tuscany and Lombardy, homes sometimes relied on bundles of dried grapevines for heat, a practice that provided a strong, fast-burning flame. Hearths were never just static fires. They required careful management, with logs adjusted and embers maintained to keep both heat and cooking temperatures steady throughout the day. In winter months, fires were kept burning continuously, especially in regions like the Scottish Highlands or Bavaria, where temperatures often fell well below freezing. The design of hearths varied widely depending on wealth, status, and regional resources. In modest rural cottages, a simple iron tripod held a cauldron over the flames, while a thick iron chain or hook allowed cooks to raise and lower pots for boiling soups, pottages, and broths. Flat iron supports or trivets allowed multiple vessels to sit above uneven embers, while wooden paddles and pokers were used to manage the fire without stepping too close. In wealthier households and manorial halls, large stone hearths could stretch across the center of a great hall, often with multiple spits for roasting meat and swinging cranes to support kettles and roasting pans. Spit roasting was especially common in England and France, with long iron rods inserted into whole animals that were slowly turned by hand or with mechanical wheels powered by servants, sometimes known as turnspit dogs, which ran in treadmills to rotate the meat. The placement of pots and spits required careful coordination, as overcrowding the fire could result in uneven cooking or flames too high for safe handling. The challenges of indoor cooking were considerable. Smoke accumulation could obscure vision and cause irritation to eyes and lungs, forcing cooks to adjust positioning or move pots closer to the edges of the hearth. Sparks and falling embers presented a constant fire hazard, particularly in wooden homes or thatched roof cottages common in England, France, and northern Germany. To reduce risk, families sometimes placed sand or clay around hearths, while in castles, stone or brick hearths extended over sunken fire pits to prevent accidental spread. Adaptations included movable iron supports that could be repositioned to suit different pot sizes or to allow multiple dishes to cook simultaneously without interference. Some kitchens even used small perforated screens or metal hoods to redirect smoke away from food and work surfaces. Fuel quality and availability also shaped cooking practices. Hardwoods such as oak, beech, and hornbeam were preferred for their longer-lasting embers, while softwoods like pine or fir burned quickly and were mainly used for rapid cooking tasks or emergency fires. Charcoal, often imported from forested regions such as the Ardennes or the Black Forest, provided a more controlled, intense heat, especially in noble kitchens where roasting large cuts of meat required steady flames. In colder regions, peat offered an abundant but smoky alternative, and its use is documented in records from Scotland, Ireland, and northern England. Households adapted not only to the type of fuel, but but to seasonal availability, stockpiling wood or peat during the summer to prepare for long winter months when foraging or cutting fuel was impossible. Even within a single household, hearths served multiple functions simultaneously. While one pot simmered over the embers, bread might be baked on a flat stone placed near the fire, and small iron pans held sauces, side dishes, or herbal infusions for seasoning. The necessity of balancing heat, smoke, and cooking times meant households often developed elaborate routines for meal preparation. Women, children, and servants coordinated tasks carefully, moving pots, adjusting fuel, and tending fires, while ensuring that food did not burn or become undercooked. Across Europe, these methods persisted for centuries, forming the basis of domestic cooking long before enclosed ovens or modern stoves became widespread. In the medieval period, cooking tools and utensils were essential extensions of the hearth, carefully adapted to open fires, rudimentary ovens, and outdoor hearths. Across England, France, and Italy, households relied on a mix of iron, bronze, ceramic, and wooden implements, each selected for durability, availability, and the specific tasks required for daily cooking. Large cast-iron cauldrons were a staple in nearly every household, suspended over fires using hooks, chains, or iron cranes. They were used to boil pottages, soups, and broths, which formed the base of most meals. In wealthier households, multiple cauldrons could hang simultaneously over the hearth, allowing cooks to prepare several dishes at once. Smaller kettles and iron pots were used for liquids such as milk, ale, or herbal infusions, while ceramic and clay vessels were widely employed for baking, storing, and serving food. The difference between peasant and noble utensils was striking. Nobles used finely wrought iron or bronze implements and specialized tools, whereas common households relied on rough-hewn iron, clay, and simple wooden items, often handmade by local smiths or carpenters. Roasting required specialized equipment. Long iron spits were used to hold whole animals, including pigs, lambs, and geese, and these could be turned by hand, although larger kitchens often employed mechanical wheels or turn spits powered by dogs to ensure even cooking. Trivets, flat iron supports, and rings stabilized pots over uneven embers, preventing tipping. In some regions of France and northern Italy, cooks placed stones around the fire to create flat surfaces or elevate cooking vessels slightly, which improved heat circulation and allowed multiple pots to cook simultaneously. Iron pans and shallow griddles were used for frying bread, pancakes, and flatbreads over open flames, a method common in both peasant cottages and noble kitchens. Wooden spoons, ladles, and paddles were essential for stirring, serving, and transferring food from pot to plate, and they were typically crafted from local hardwoods such as oak, beech, or ash, selected for their resistance to heat and durability over repeated use. Baking posed particular challenges. Enclosed ovens were rare in smaller homes, so clay or ceramic vessels were placed directly in embers or on heated stones, often with embers pushed over or around them to maintain consistent heat. Larger manorial kitchens built brick ovens adjacent to hearths or in separate rooms, which maintained higher, more even temperatures suitable for bread, pastries, and pies. Castles and monasteries often had specialized baking tools, including long-handled paddles for sliding bread into the oven, racks for cooling baked goods, molds for shaping dough, and even perforated trays for delicate pastries. Cookbooks from the 14th century, such as Martino da Como's Libro de Arte Culinaria, demonstrate the mixture of domestic and professional tools in use, ranging from simple cauldrons to complex roasting spits with adjustable hooks and chains, showing a clear understanding of the practical requirements of large-scale cooking. Smaller implements were equally important for preparation and seasoning. Mortars and pestles allowed cooks to grind herbs, seeds, and spices, while knives, cleavers, and specialized cutting tools enabled butchering, slicing, and preparing vegetables. Wooden boards, often just carved planks, served as surfaces for kneading dough and cutting food. Ladles, skimmers, and perforated spoons made removing food from boiling liquids easier, and tongs were used to handle hot coals, pots, and spits safely. In wealthier households, pewter and silver utensils were used for eating, though these were generally not employed directly in cooking. The practical knowledge of how to maintain and repair these tools was also widespread. Irons were regularly heated and hammered, wooden implements were replaced as needed, and ceramic pots were carefully stacked and stored to avoid cracking. Regional differences shaped the choice and use of utensils. Northern Europe relied heavily on iron and wood due to abundant forests, while Southern Europe, including Italy and Spain, favored ceramic and bronze, particularly in urban kitchens and noble estates. Traveling merchants, soldiers, and pilgrims carried portable pots, tripods, and simple utensils, demonstrating the adaptability of medieval cooking tools to various environments. These implements reflected an understanding of heat management, material properties, and practical ergonomics, as well as a careful balance between cost, availability, and functionality. Across Europe, cooks developed highly systematic methods for using their tools effectively, balancing the limitations of open flames with the need to prepare a wide range of dishes for households of all sizes, from simple rural cottages to bustling castles and monasteries. In the medieval period, outdoor cooking was a common solution to the challenges of open fires and limited indoor ventilation. Villages, castles, and monasteries all relied on external hearths, fire pits, and courtyards to prepare meals, especially when roasting large animals or cooking for groups. Open-air cooking reduced the risks of smoke inhalation and accidental fires that were prevalent indoors, particularly in timber-framed homes with thatched roofs. Across England, France, and Italy, cooks built simple fire pits surrounded by stones or earth to contain embers, elevate pots, and regulate heat. In castle courtyards, larger pits could accommodate multiple spits for roasting meat, while in rural villages, families often used a single pit with a tripod or iron crane to suspend cauldrons. Seasonal variations also dictated outdoor cooking practices, with larger feasts in spring and autumn requiring substantial fire setups, whereas small family meals might use portable tripods or clay braziers near the home. Spit roasting over open pits was one of the most prominent outdoor cooking techniques. Whole pigs, geese, and lambs were skewered on long iron rods and rotated over the flames by hand, with larger kitchens in castles or monasteries employing turnspits powered by dogs to maintain a consistent cooking speed. Roasts were basted with animal fats or wine to prevent drying, while coals were carefully shifted to maintain even heat. Archaeological evidence from 14th century manor sites in England indicates that some roasting pits were constructed with brick or stone surrounds to stabilize spits and allow multiple animals to be cooked simultaneously. French and Italian records similarly describe courtyard kitchens designed to handle dozens of spits for banquets, often with specialized attendants managing the fire and rotation of the meat throughout the day. Boiling in cauldrons was equally important for outdoor preparation, particularly for soups, pottages, and stews that could feed large groups. Cast iron pots were suspended over pits using hooks, chains, or tripods, while smaller kettles and pans could be placed on stone supports or flat embers. Herbs, grains, and preserved meats were combined to create hearty dishes that could last for hours over low heat. In monasteries, communal kitchens used massive cauldrons in courtyards to feed both monks and travelers, often employing a rotation of assistants to monitor boiling and ensure ingredients were evenly cooked. Village households adapted these techniques on a smaller scale, using clay or iron pots set over shallow pits while covering them with lids or heated stones to trap heat and prevent contamination. Outdoor baking also featured prominently, especially for communal bread preparation. Clay or brick ovens were often constructed near courtyards or along village streets, heated with wood fires and covered to retain warmth. Bread, flatbreads, and simple pastries were inserted using long wooden paddles, while trays and molds allowed multiple loaves to cook at once. Seasonal festivals and market days often relied on outdoor ovens to feed entire communities, reflecting a practical solution to indoor space limitations. In rural areas, families without permanent ovens used small portable clay or iron ovens that could be placed over pits or heated stones, a method particularly common in Northern Europe, where temporary outdoor setups allowed for winter baking without filling homes with smoke. Feasts and seasonal celebrations further amplified outdoor cooking. Medieval manuscripts describe harvest festivals, religious celebrations, and weddings, where large cauldrons and spits were arranged in open courtyards to feed hundreds. Italian city records from Florence in the late 14th century note communal roasting of animals during major religious holidays, with specialized teams of cooks coordinating fire management, spit rotation, and dish preparation. Similarly, English accounts from manor estates in Yorkshire highlight the use of external fire pits for baking, boiling, and roasting simultaneously, illustrating the efficiency of outdoor kitchens in managing large-scale meal preparation. Even on a smaller scale, outdoor cooking influenced daily practices. Herbs, spices, and preserved foods were often combined over open flames, while seasonal vegetables were roasted, boiled, or fried according to availability. Portable cooking setups allowed travelers, soldiers, and merchants to prepare meals on the move, ensuring that the principles of open-fire cooking extended beyond static home kitchens. Across Europe, outdoor methods complemented indoor hearths, providing safety, practicality, and versatility for medieval cooks facing the limitations of fire, ventilation, and space. Before modern refrigeration, medieval households relied on a variety of preservation techniques to keep food edible for weeks or even months. Salting was among the most common methods, particularly for meat and fish. Coastal towns in England, the Netherlands, and France relied heavily on salted herring and cod, which provided reliable protein through the winter. Meat cuts were rubbed with coarse salt, sometimes combined with herbs such as rosemary, thyme, or sage, and then stored in barrels, wooden chests, or ceramic jars to draw out moisture and prevent spoilage. Inland regions often supplemented salting with smoking. Hardwoods like oak, beech, and alder were burned to produce smoke, which dried and flavored meats while simultaneously reducing bacterial growth. Records from 14th century manors in East Anglia indicate that entire rooms were sometimes devoted to hanging hams, sausages, and joints of venison over smoking fires for weeks at a time, and specialized racks or hooks were often installed to maximize airflow and preserve the meat evenly. Pickling added another layer of preservation, particularly for vegetables and fruits. Cucumbers, cabbage, onions, and apples were placed in earthenware jars filled with brine or spiced vinegar, sometimes sealed with cloth or wax to limit air exposure. Fermentation not only preserved these foods, but also provided additional nutrition when fresh produce was unavailable. Monastic kitchens in Burgundy and Flanders were especially active in pickling operations, as evidenced by abbey records from the 1300s, ensuring that monks, pilgrims, and travelers had access to safe and nutritious food throughout the year. Vinegar, wine, and even fermented fruit juices were used as brines, often enhanced with herbs or spices to improve flavor. Some households also experimented with layering different vegetables together to create mixed pickles, which could last longer and provide variety during long winters. Drying was widely applied to grains, legumes, herbs, and fruits. Sunlight, heated terraces, and specially designed racks helped remove moisture from beans, peas, lentils, figs, dates, and raisins. Dried legumes formed the backbone of peasant diets, while dried fruits were more common among wealthier households or urban merchants. Italian city-states, such as Venice and Genoa, imported large quantities of dried and candied fruits, taking advantage of extensive trade networks to maintain stores that could last months. Herbs were commonly tied in small bundles and hung in kitchens or lofts to dry. Sage, parsley, thyme, and marjoram ensured that flavoring agents were available year-round, even when fresh options were limited by season. Drying also allowed merchants to transport goods across regions without spoilage, linking preservation with commerce. Fat preservation was particularly important for meat and pottages. Pigs, geese, and other animals were often rendered into lard or tallow, which was stored in sealed pots. Meat could then be submerged in fat or cooked slowly in grease to create confits that lasted for weeks. This technique was widely practiced in France and northern Italy, with household inventories from the 14th and 15th centuries frequently listing jars of lard alongside salted or smoked meats. Fat preservation also allowed for easier transport of food, which was especially useful for merchants, soldiers, or travelers crossing long distances, or participating in military campaigns. Primitive cold storage complemented these methods. Cellars, stone basements, and spring houses provided cooler, more stable conditions for perishable foods like butter, milk, and cheeses. In cities such as Florence, Paris, and London, wealthier households often had underground storage rooms lined with thick stone walls to maintain lower temperatures. Snow and ice were occasionally harvested from nearby hills or rivers during winter and packed into insulated pits to prolong freshness, though such methods required labor and resources typically accessible only to the affluent. Some estates even created early ice houses insulated with straw to extend storage capabilities. All of these preservation techniques directly influence daily cooking and menu planning. Households combine preserved ingredients with fresh seasonal produce whenever possible, balancing nutrition, flavor, and availability. Regional differences shape practices. Coastal towns focused on fish preservation, inland regions emphasized salted and smoked meats, and urban centers relied on imported preserves, dried goods, and trade networks to maintain stable supplies. The careful use of salt, smoke, vinegar, dried goods, fats, and cold storage reflects a sophisticated understanding of food longevity for the time. These strategies reveal that medieval survival and culinary culture were deeply intertwined, relying on both ingenuity and an intimate knowledge of natural resources to sustain households across Europe. Grains form the backbone of medieval diets, shaping both everyday meals and the wider culinary culture of Europe. Wheat, rye, barley, and oats were the primary cereals, each suited to particular climates and soils. In northern regions like England, Scotland, and the Low Countries, rye and oats were the most reliable crops, thriving in cooler, wetter conditions. In contrast, wheat dominated southern France, Italy, and Spain, where warmer soils produced finer flour. Preparing these grains required milling, often at communal watermills or windmills, though small households sometimes relied on hand querns. The milling process dictated the texture of flour, affecting the consistency of bread, porridge, and pottages, and municipal records from 14th century England and France indicate that grinding fees and regulated mill schedules were common, reflecting the essential social and economic role of grain. Disputes over priority and timing at mills illustrate just how central cereals were to both survival and daily life, sometimes leading to local regulations or agreements to ensure fair access for peasants and urban dwellers alike. Bread was the most widespread product of these grains, ranging from coarse, dark rye loaves for peasants to finely milled wheat bread in noble households and urban bakeries. Baking took place in stone or clay ovens in villages, or in brick ovens in manorial estates, where temperatures could be maintained more consistently. Dough was typically made from flour and water, sometimes with salt or leavening agents like sourdough starter to encourage rising. Bread was not only a source of sustenance, but also a practical vessel for other foods. Spreads, cheeses, and meats were frequently served atop loaves. Castle inventories from northern France record multiple daily loaves in kitchens, showing the scale required to feed entire households, while surviving accounts from city bakers detail the careful monitoring of heat and timing to avoid waste in a period when food was precious. Bakers often employed long-handled wooden paddles and metal tools to slide dough into ovens safely, adjusting placement and rotation to prevent burning and ensure even baking. Porridges, gruels, and pottages supplemented bread as daily staples, particularly for peasants. Grains such as oats, barley, or millet were boiled in water, milk, or ale to create thick, nourishing meals. Household records and 14th century cookbooks indicate that these dishes often incorporated vegetables, legumes, herbs, or small amounts of meat or fish for flavor and nutrition. Large cauldrons were typically kept simmering over hearths throughout the day, providing continuous access to food for laborers, children, and family members. Regional variations were common. Oat porridge dominated northern England and Scotland. Barley-based pottages were more frequent in Central Europe. And in Italy, coarse polenta made from maize or millet performed a similar role. Monastic kitchens sometimes maintained daily schedules for gruel preparation, demonstrating the organized, routine approach to sustaining both monks and surrounding communities. In some estates, flavored porridges were served to travelers or officials visiting the manor, illustrating the social as well as practical function of these staple dishes. Proper storage of grains was critical to prevent spoilage from moisture, pests, or mold. Barrels, sacks, and raised granaries were standard, with larger estates maintaining separate stores for peasant households and the manor kitchens. Seasonal planning dictated the quantities set aside during harvest, and 14th century records from Florence, London, and Paris show how civic authorities and private households coordinated grain distribution to ensure continuous supply. Grain was also an important trade commodity. Merchants transported surplus flour or whole cereals to neighboring towns or regions experiencing shortages, reinforcing its economic significance. Granaries were often carefully designed with ventilation and raised floors to protect against dampness and rodent infestations, demonstrating medieval ingenuity in food preservation. Grains played a role in ceremonial and communal occasions. Special loaves and enriched porridges were prepared for religious festivals, weddings, and market days, often incorporating eggs, milk, honey, or dried fruits. These recipes highlight the adaptability of cereal-based foods, capable of serving both daily sustenance and celebratory purposes. From basic oat porridge in a peasant cottage to refined wheat loaves in a noble hall, grains structured daily life, shaped culinary practices, and supported social hierarchies across medieval Europe. The preparation, storage, and consumption of cereals demonstrate that even in a pre-modern context, people had developed systematic methods to feed households efficiently while adapting to seasonal and regional limitations. Grains were not merely fuel for the body. They defined social rituals, economic systems, and the rhythm of life across towns, villages, and estates, forming the enduring backbone of medieval society. Meat held a central place in medieval diets, though its consumption and preparation varied widely by region, season, and social class. Wealthier households, particularly in manors, castles, and urban centers, enjoyed a steady supply of beef, pork, lamb, and poultry, while peasants relied primarily on smaller livestock, such as pigs, goats, and chickens, supplemented by hunted game when available. Hunting rights were strictly regulated, with forests reserved for nobles, which made venison a symbol of status, as well as a prized ingredient in feasts. Records from 14th century England and France indicate that household accounts meticulously listed cuts of meat, highlighting the importance of planning both for consumption and for preservation through salting, smoking, or fat rendering. Seasonal hunting, livestock rotations, and market purchases all contributed to the variety and availability of meats, creating a complex system that balanced household needs with regional regulations and trade networks. Butchering was a skill-intensive process, requiring knowledge of anatomy and careful handling to maximize usable portions. Knives, cleavers, saws, and specialized hooks were employed to separate joints, trim fat, and prepare meat for cooking, while wooden boards and tables served as preparation surfaces. Larger households maintained specialized kitchens for meat, with cauldrons, spits, and roasting cranes arranged around central hearths. In urban areas and manorial estates, dedicated meat rooms were used for hanging, curing, and organizing supplies, often adjacent to the main kitchen. Hygiene, smoke management, and careful handling were critical, as improperly stored or prepared meat could spoil rapidly, threatening both health and the household's food supply. Household inventories often included lists of storage containers, hooks, and smoking racks, illustrating the degree of organization required to manage meat effectively. Roasting was the most common method for cooking larger cuts, particularly in festive or noble contexts. Long iron spits held whole animals, pigs, geese, and occasionally deer over open fires. In smaller households, spits were turned manually by servants, but wealthier estates employed mechanical turn spits powered by dogs or geared wheels to ensure even roasting over several hours. Maintaining a steady heat was essential. Meat too close to the embers could char on the outside while remaining raw within, while meat too far away would cook slowly and unevenly. Iron cranes, trivets, and flat supports allowed cooks to position pots and spits precisely, accommodating varying sizes and types of meat simultaneously. Smaller cuts and poultry were frequently roasted in cauldrons or pans over coals, while skewers and hooks provided additional flexibility. Marinades of wine, vinegar, herbs, and spices were commonly applied to enhance flavor and tenderize tougher cuts, particularly beef and game. Evidence from Italian city-states, including Florence and Venice, shows that chefs experimented with complex spice blends, reflecting both imported trade goods and a growing emphasis on refined taste. In Northern Europe, simpler seasonings such as salt, herbs, and rendered fat were more common, emphasizing preservation and practicality over elaborate flavoring. Even small household kitchens adapted techniques to available resources, demonstrating the ingenuity of cooks across all social classes. Cooking meat required coordination and constant attention. Servants or specialized kitchen staff monitored turning spits, adjusted coals, and managed multiple fires to maintain consistent temperatures. Smoke and sparks presented ongoing hazards, especially in wooden or thatched homes, necessitating hearth designs with stone or clay surrounds and chimneys when available. Large households often maintained schedules for meat preparation, roasting, and service, ensuring dishes were ready for communal meals, feasts, or market distribution without waste. Kitchens functioned as both culinary spaces and logistical hubs, where labor, tools, and timing were carefully orchestrated. Roasting was closely tied to social and ceremonial life. Banquets, religious festivals, and hunting feasts all relied on meat as a centerpiece, often accompanied by bread, porridge, and vegetables. Even in peasant communities, roasting small animals over open fires marked celebratory occasions or seasonal abundance. From basic spit-roasted chickens in rural cottages to elaborately prepared venison and pork in noble halls, meat and roasting techniques illustrated not only culinary skill, but also the intersection of diet, status, and household organization. The preparation and roasting of meat highlight the resourcefulness of medieval cooks, who balanced fire management, preservation, and flavor in an era without modern stoves or temperature control. This careful orchestration of tools, space, and labor ensured that meat remained a reliable and versatile component of European diets, sustaining both daily nutrition and communal rituals across centuries, and leaving a lasting legacy in the medieval culinary tradition. Dairy products were a cornerstone of medieval nutrition, providing essential calories, protein, and fat to households across Europe. Milk from cows, goats, and sheep was consumed in its raw form, boiled for safety, or transformed into longer-lasting foods such as cheese, butter, and whey. The availability of milk was highly seasonal, peaking in spring and summer when pastures were abundant, and declining in winter, necessitating careful planning and preservation strategies. Wealthier estates often maintained extensive dairies with multiple animals, dedicated dairy staff, and specialized storage rooms, while peasant households typically kept a few livestock sufficient for immediate household consumption. In some regions, households also relied on communal grazing rights or rented pastures to supplement the diet of their animals, highlighting the broader agricultural infrastructure that supported milk production. Cheese was among the most important dairy products, valued both for its nutritional content and its durability. Hard cheeses such as aged cow or sheep varieties could last for months, while softer cheeses were consumed shortly after production. Techniques varied regionally. In Northern Europe, cows' and goats' milk was pressed, salted, and aged to create firm, transportable cheeses, whereas southern regions such as Italy, Spain, and Provence produced richer, oilier sheep cheeses. Monasteries were particularly influential in refining cheese-making, with 14th century records from Burgundy, Flanders, and Tuscany detailing large-scale production that supplied both monastic communities and surrounding populations. Cheese-making involved curdling milk with rennet, pressing curds into molds, salting, and aging under controlled conditions, requiring close attention to temperature, humidity, and timing to prevent spoilage while enhancing flavor and texture. Butter was particularly significant in Northern Europe, where animal fat was essential for sustaining energy in colder climates. Cream was separated from milk by skimming and then churned into butter, sometimes salted to extend shelf life. Larger households and manorial estates maintained specialized dairy kitchens for butter production, with staff dedicated to churning, clarifying, and storing the final product. Peasant families used simpler methods, churning by hand and consuming butter quickly, or selling small amounts at local markets. Butter was versatile in cooking and baking, used in pies, pastries, sauces, and frying, demonstrating its importance both as a culinary ingredient and a calorie-dense food for daily sustenance. Other dairy byproducts were equally integral to medieval kitchens. Whey, the liquid left after curdling milk, was used for gruels, breads, and pottages, adding both flavor and protein. Buttermilk served a similar purpose, often mixed with grains to create hearty meals for peasants, while cream, though less common among lower classes, was prized in noble kitchens for sauces, desserts, and rich pastries. Recipes from Italian city-states, France, and England illustrate sophisticated dairy use, with different regions favoring particular combinations depending on available resources, season, and culinary tradition. Some monasteries even maintained small dairies dedicated solely to producing cream and butter for use in celebratory feasts or communal meals. Storage and preservation were essential for maintaining dairy supplies year-round. Milk was highly perishable, consumed fresh, or converted into longer-lasting products. Cheese was aged in cool, ventilated cellars, sometimes coated with fat or wax to protect against insects and spoilage. Butter was stored in earthenware pots, occasionally submerged in cold water, or kept in spring houses or stone cellars to maintain freshness. Larger estates and monasteries developed detailed routines for monitoring dairy products, ensuring that cheese, butter, and milk remained edible through winter months. Seasonal planning, careful handling, and division of labor reflected a sophisticated understanding of both food preservation and household management. Dairy shaped the rhythm of medieval meals and culinary culture more broadly. Bread was frequently paired with butter or cheese, providing simple yet sustaining sustenance, while feasts featured dairy-enriched sauces, pies, custards, and tarts. The production, storage, and consumption of dairy also reflected social hierarchy. Nobles and monks enjoyed greater variety and refinement, while peasants relied on practicality and immediate availability. Across Europe, cheese, butter, and milk were more than ingredients. They structured daily nutrition, supported regional culinary identities, and connected households to broader economic and social networks. From rural cottages to grand monasteries, the careful management of dairy ensured both survival and enjoyment, illustrating the ingenuity and resourcefulness of medieval cooks in a pre-refrigeration world. Herbs and spices were central to medieval cuisine, shaping flavors, preserving foods, and signaling wealth and status. Fresh herbs were grown in gardens, at manor houses, monasteries, and even small peasant plots, while imported spices came from distant lands, carried along complex trade routes connecting Europe with Asia and the Middle East. The distinction between locally grown herbs and costly imported spices reflected both practical and social considerations. Herbs were accessible to most households, while exotic spices were markers of wealth, often used to impress guests at feasts or demonstrate prestige in urban and noble settings. They also symbolized cultural connections, with the use of foreign spices signaling participation in global trade networks and sophisticated culinary trends. Common herbs included parsley, sage, thyme, rosemary, mint, and marjoram, each chosen for its aroma, flavor, and sometimes medicinal qualities. These were used fresh when in season, often chopped finely and added at the end of cooking to preserve their fragrance, or tied into bundles and hung to dry for year-round use. Dried herbs were particularly important in winter months, ensuring continuity of flavor despite seasonal limitations. Records from 14th century England and Italy show detailed inventories of herb gardens, noting both quantities harvested and storage methods, reflecting the careful planning necessary to maintain a reliable supply. Some households even experimented with combining herbs to create signature flavors unique to their kitchens. Spices, by contrast, were exotic and expensive. sourced from regions such as India, the Spice Islands, and the Levant. Black pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and ginger were among the most prized, often appearing in recipes for meats, stews, pastries, and desserts. Because of their cost, spices were sparingly used, sometimes mixed with salt or sugar to extend their reach. Beyond flavor, spices served a practical purpose. They could mask the taste of less than fresh meat or fish, particularly in urban markets where refrigeration did not exist. Monastic records from Flanders and Italy indicate the use of spice blends in preparing meals for travelers and pilgrims, demonstrating both the culinary and social significance of these ingredients. Spices were often carefully measured, reflecting a balance between taste, expense, and the desire to impress diners with exotic flavors. Preparation techniques were varied and precise. Herbs were chopped, crushed, or pounded in mortars to release essential oils, while spices were ground or toasted to intensify flavor. Some dishes combined multiple herbs and spices, creating complex profiles that contrasted sharply with the simpler, heartier fare of peasants. Noble households often maintained dedicated spice racks, with containers of silver, pewter, or earthenware, labeled meticulously to prevent cross-contamination and preserve potency. The careful organization of these ingredients reflects both the value placed on spices and the labor-intensive methods required to store, prepare, and use them effectively, as well as the culinary pride and skill of the cooks themselves. Herbs and spices also intersected with medicine, with many considered to have therapeutic properties. Rosemary was thought to improve memory, sage to aid digestion, and cloves to relieve toothaches. Cookbooks and medical treatises of the period often blur the lines between culinary and medicinal uses, demonstrating a medieval worldview in which food and health were deeply intertwined. This dual purpose reinforced the household's investment in cultivating, preserving, and using herbs thoughtfully, ensuring both nourishment and wellness. Regional differences shaped the use of herbs and spices. Northern Europe relied more heavily on robust, locally grown herbs, while southern regions, especially Italy and Spain, incorporated imported spices more extensively into sauces, meats, and desserts. Urban centers with active markets and trade networks had greater access to exotic spices, which became markers of social distinction. Even within a single household, the choice and combination of flavorings could vary depending on the season, the status of the diners, and the occasion, making each meal an expression of taste, wealth, and cultural awareness. The integration of herbs and spices into medieval cooking demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of flavor layering, preservation, and sensory impact. From fresh garden herbs in peasant stews to intricate spice blends in the halls of nobles, these ingredients shape both the taste and experience of food. Their use reflects the ingenuity, adaptability, and social awareness of medieval cooks, who balanced practicality, nutrition, and aesthetic pleasure in every meal. In this way, herbs and spices were far more than mere seasonings. They were instruments of culture, economy, and status, permeating every aspect of European culinary life. Beer, ale, and other fermented beverages were central to medieval life, providing both nutrition and social cohesion. In many communities, drinking water was often unsafe, particularly in towns and cities where contamination was common. Fermented drinks, by contrast, were considered safer due to the boiling and fermentation processes that reduced harmful microbes and minimized disease. Ale, brewed from barley or other cereals, was the daily staple for peasants and laborers, while beer and spiced or imported drinks appeared more frequently in the households of merchants, nobles, and monasteries. Brewing was both a household necessity and a commercial enterprise, and its techniques were closely guarded, passed down through generations, and sometimes standardized within guilds, monastic orders, or local craft regulations to ensure consistency and quality. The process of brewing began with malting, where grains such as barley were soaked, germinated, and then dried to convert starches into fermentable sugars. The malted grains were crushed and mixed with water to create a mash, which was then heated to extract sweetness and flavor. Hops were introduced in Northern Europe by the 13th century, adding both aroma and preservative qualities, while earlier recipes relied on a mixture of herbs known as gruel. In monastic breweries, precise control of temperature, timing, and ingredient ratios reflected both experimentation and tradition, producing ales of varying strength and character that could be consumed immediately or stored for months, sometimes in barrels lined with wax, resin, or pitch to improve preservation and prevent spoilage. Fermentation was the crucial stage. Wild yeasts present in the environment, or later cultivated yeasts, transformed sugars into alcohol, creating beverages with sufficient strength to sustain and preserve them. The alcohol content varied widely. Weak ales provided hydration and calories, while stronger beers and spiced wines were reserved for festive occasions, medicinal use, or trade. Brewing vessels ranged from wooden barrels and clay pots to specialized copper kettles in wealthier households, with sanitation carefully maintained to avoid spoilage or contamination. Records from 14th century Flanders, England, and northern Italy illustrate detailed brewing schedules, showing how ale production was integrated into daily household, monastic, and communal life, with brewing often forming a central part of social and economic activity. Wine was equally significant, especially in southern Europe, where vineyards flourished in favorable climates. Grapes were pressed, fermented, and sometimes aged in barrels to produce wines consumed daily by urban residents and nobility alike. Wine varieties ranged from robust reds to light whites, often sweetened with honey or flavored with spices for special occasions. Monasteries played a dual role, maintaining both vineyards and brewing operations, supplying not only their own communities, but also travelers, pilgrims, and local populations. In France, Italy, and Spain, wine became a marker of regional identity and refinement, influencing culinary practices, ceremonial toasts, and social rituals across classes and guilds alike. Other beverages included cider, mead, and herbal infusions. Apples were pressed into cider, particularly in England and Normandy, while honey was fermented into mead, a sweet alcoholic drink associated with ceremonial use and festive banquets. Herbal beverages and spiced drinks were consumed for flavor, warmth, and perceived medicinal benefits. Records from city markets in Florence, Paris, and Ghent detailed the trade in spices, honey, and hops, showing the interconnectedness of beverage production, commerce, and household consumption, as well as the rising sophistication of urban taverns, inns, and local breweries. Serving and consumption of beverages carried social and cultural significance. Ale and beer were consumed communally in taverns, marketplaces, and manor halls, often accompanied by bread, cheese, and simple meals. Wine and mead were used to toast significant occasions, such as weddings, religious festivals, and formal feasts, reinforcing hierarchy and status. Even within households, careful rotation of weaker and stronger drinks ensured that laborers, family members, and guests received beverages suited to both sustenance and celebration. The production, preservation, and enjoyment of fermented beverages reflect a sophisticated understanding of chemistry, hygiene, and logistics in the medieval period. Brewing was not merely a culinary practice, but a cornerstone of daily life, shaping social interaction, nutrition, and commerce. From the humble alehouses of Northern Europe to the refined wines of southern estates, beverages provided sustenance, pleasure, and a tangible connection to seasonal cycles, trade networks, and cultural identity, emphasizing the integral role of drink in medieval society and the daily rhythms of medieval communities. Medieval cooking was deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the seasons, reflecting both agricultural cycles and the ecclesiastical calendar. Availability of ingredients dictated the daily diet, while festivals and religious observances provided occasions for more elaborate preparations. Seasonal produce, meat, and dairy determined which dishes could be prepared at any given time, and households, from peasant cottages to noble estates, carefully planned menus to align with both abundance and scarcity, often coordinating tasks across family members, servants, and specialized kitchen staff to ensure that each meal reflected the season's bounty. Spring brought the first fresh vegetables and herbs after long winters. Peas, leeks, onions, and early greens were harvested and incorporated into pottages, gruels, and small pies. Lamb and young poultry appeared on tables, often accompanied by freshly churned butter and newly baked bread. Dairy products, particularly cheese and whey, were abundant in late spring, as livestock produced their heaviest milk yields. Household records from 14th century England and France detail careful planning of meals during this season, ensuring that the perishable produce was consumed quickly or preserved through salting, drying, or pickling, while gardens and orchards were pruned and prepared for the summer growth. Summer marked the height of abundance. Garden vegetables, berries, and herbs were at their peak, while livestock continued to provide milk, eggs, and meat. Harvesting of cereals began in late summer, providing grains for bread, porridge, and brewing. Noble estates often hosted larger communal meals and open-air feasts during this period, showcasing fresh produce alongside roasted meats and elaborate pastries. Preservation methods, including drying, smoking, and fermenting, were employed to store surplus food for winter months. In urban centers, market records show that peasants and merchants alike relied on seasonal cycles to determine when certain goods were available, from early strawberries to summer herbs and leafy greens, allowing households to plan both daily meals and celebratory banquets effectively. Autumn brought the harvest of late fruits, vegetables, and nuts, alongside root crops such as carrots, turnips, and parsnips. Apples, pears, and quinces were pressed for cider, baked into tarts, or preserved in honey. Meat preservation intensified as hunters brought game from forests, and pigs were slaughtered for sausages and salted cuts. Grain stores were replenished, and milling operations intensified, ensuring bread and porridge could be prepared throughout the coming months. Feast days, such as Michaelmas, coincided with autumn harvests and featured rich dishes incorporating meats, dairy, and the season's last fruits. Recipes from Italian and French households suggest that autumnal feasts often combine sweet and savory flavors, with dried fruits, honey, and spices enhancing otherwise simple dishes, and sometimes incorporating imported delicacies for urban or noble tables. Winter presented the greatest challenges, as fresh produce became scarce and diets relied heavily on preserved foods. Root vegetables, salted meats, cured fish, and stored grains formed the backbone of sustenance, while dried fruits, nuts, and imported spices added flavor and variety. Baking and brewing were crucial, as bread, pies, and ale provided both nutrition and comfort during long, cold months. Holiday celebrations, particularly around Christmas and the Feast of the Epiphany, allowed for more elaborate meals, often involving roasted meats, pies, and rich desserts. Noble households prepared special dishes using imported spices, sugar, and luxury ingredients, while monasteries organized communal meals to feed both monks and visiting pilgrims, with kitchens operating almost continuously to meet demand. Festivals punctuated the seasonal rhythms, blending religious observance with culinary display. Lent imposed dietary restrictions, limiting meat consumption and emphasizing fish, pulses, and dairy substitutes. Saints' days, harvest festivals, and royal occasions provided opportunities for feasts, showcasing the finest ingredients available, with menus carefully planned to reflect both tradition and abundance. Surviving cookbooks and household accounts illustrate that festival cooking required extensive preparation, from marinating and spicing meats to baking elaborate tarts and constructing centerpieces that combined visual appeal with culinary skill, sometimes involving dozens of kitchen assistants and coordinated timing for multiple courses. The interplay of seasonal cycles and festival traditions shaped not only what was eaten, but also how medieval households organized labor, storage, and preservation. From early spring greens to winter pies and spiced meats, cooking followed a deliberate rhythm, balancing the limitations of nature with ingenuity and ceremonial expectation. Across social classes, seasonal and festival dishes reflected both necessity and aspiration, offering sustenance, celebration, and a structured way to mark the passage of time, while connecting households to local markets, monastic resources, and broader cultural traditions. Cooking in castles and noble houses was a complex operation, reflecting both the status of the household and the practical demands of feeding large numbers of people. Kitchens in these residences were substantial spaces, often separate from the main hall to reduce smoke, heat, and fire hazards, yet positioned close enough to serve banquets efficiently. Wealthier estates employed specialized staff, including master cooks, sous cooks, pastry chefs, butchers, and kitchen assistants, each responsible for different aspects of meal preparation. Records from 14th century England, France, and Italy show detailed household accounts listing both ingredients and labor, illustrating the scale, organization, and careful financial management required to sustain noble households year-round, as well as the coordination necessary during busy feast periods. The design of noble kitchens was purposeful. Large hearths, equipped with multiple spits, cranes, and cauldrons, allowed simultaneous cooking of meats, stews, and pottages. Roasting spits could accommodate whole animals, with mechanical turnspits powered by dogs or geared wheels reducing manual labor. Stone or brick ovens baked bread, pies, and pastries, while smaller braziers and hot plates were used for delicate sauces or side dishes. Storage areas were integral, including cool cellars for meats, dairy, and wines, and pantries for dry goods, spices, and preserved foods. Some castles even maintained gardens or nearby orchards, supplying fresh herbs, vegetables, and fruits directly to the kitchens, ensuring a steady flow of seasonal ingredients for both daily meals and special banquets. Meal preparation followed strict schedules, coordinated to ensure that dishes were ready simultaneously for service in the Great Hall. Banquets and daily meals required careful timing. Roasts needed hours of slow cooking, while pies and tarts baked more quickly. Large cauldrons simmered soups and pottages for hours, often tended by apprentices, while master cooks monitored seasoning, temperature, and presentation. Monastic influences on culinary practices were evident in noble kitchens, particularly regarding the use of spices, sauces, and layered dishes, reflecting a blend of practicality, refinement, and status. Kitchens also had to coordinate with storerooms and larders, ensuring perishable ingredients were used efficiently to minimize waste. Ingredients were sourced both locally and through long-distance trade. Meat included beef, lamb, pork, poultry, and game, while fish and shellfish appeared in coastal estates or during fast days. Cereals, dairy, and vegetables formed the staples, supplemented with imported spices such as pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and saffron to demonstrate wealth and sophistication. Records from Italian city-states, Burgundy, and Flanders describe elaborate provisioning for noble households, including wine, sugar, and exotic fruits, which were carefully stored and rationed to balance preservation and daily consumption. Households even maintained stockpiles of dried, salted, or smoked foods to sustain kitchens during winter months or periods of scarcity. The scale of production required meticulous organization. Kitchens operated almost continuously, with teams divided by function. Butchers prepared cuts for immediate cooking or preservation. Bakers produced daily bread and pastries. Dairy staff managed butter, cheese, and cream, and specialized attendants oversaw spices, sauces, and garnishes. Hygiene and safety were critical, with dedicated water sources, fire management, and rodent prevention measures implemented to protect both food and staff. Detailed logs of stock and expenditure demonstrate that these households approached cooking as both an art and a form of logistical management, coordinating labor, timing, and inventory to serve large and often unpredictable numbers of diners. Feasts and festivals provided opportunities to display culinary prowess. Presentation was as important as flavor. Roasted animals were often decorated with pastries, gilded in edible gold leaf, or arranged with fruits and vegetables in visually striking patterns. Centerpieces could involve sculpted pastries, sugarwork, or elaborate pies, impressing guests and reinforcing the household's social standing. Even everyday meals adhered to hierarchical norms, with nobles receiving the most choice cuts, seasoned with costly spices, while retainers and servants consumed simpler, hearty fare prepared from the same ingredients. The spectacle of food reinforced social hierarchies, authority, and hospitality. Cooking in castles and noble houses was thus a reflection of social hierarchy, technical skill, and resource management. It combined the artistry of taste and presentation with the efficiency of organization, turning raw ingredients into meals that sustained, impressed, and celebrated. From the daily bread and pottages of the staff, to the intricately spiced roasts and pastries of the Great Hall, these kitchens exemplified the centrality of food to medieval life, revealing how culinary practices intertwined with wealth, power, and cultural identity across Europe. Kitchens were simultaneously spaces of labor, artistry, and social expression, essential to both household function and the projection of status. Peasant cooking in medieval Europe was shaped by necessity, seasonal availability, and local resources. Unlike the kitchens of castles and noble houses, peasant households operated on a smaller scale, often with a single hearth serving as both cooking area and central heat source. Families relied heavily on grains, legumes, root vegetables, dairy, and occasionally small livestock, while access to meat, fish, or imported spices was limited by wealth, geography, and social restrictions. Archaeological evidence from 13th and 14th century villages in England, such as Warham Percy, shows that most cottages contained one or two small hearths, reflecting the modest scale of domestic food preparation. Grains formed the backbone of peasant diets. Oats, barley, rye, and wheat were milled at local watermills or by hand using querns, then boiled into porridge, gruels, or baked into coarse breads. Porridges were particularly versatile. Thick versions served as meals, while thinner gruels could be combined with milk or ale for additional sustenance. Household accounts from 1332 England, preserved in the manorial rolls of Lutterworth, detail allocations of barley and rye for porridge preparation, ensuring families could endure periods of scarcity, particularly during winter months. Baking was typically done in communal ovens when available, a practice documented in 14th century French villages such as Villeneuve-les-Avignon, or directly on hearthstones, with careful attention to prevent burning or undercooking, as food waste carried significant consequences. Vegetables and legumes provided essential nutrients and flavor. Onions, leeks, cabbages, peas, beans, and turnips were commonly grown in small garden plots surrounding cottages. These ingredients were boiled, mashed, or incorporated into stews and pottages, often combined with grains for a filling and economical meal. Herbs such as parsley, sage, and mint were cultivated in modest herb gardens, while wild plants, nettles, sorrel, and dandelion greens supplemented diets when cultivated produce ran short. Records from 14th century Italian villages such as San Gimignano list annual harvests of peas, beans, and herbs, demonstrating careful planning and rotation to ensure year-round availability. Meat and fish were less common but highly valued. Pigs, chickens, and goats provided modest protein, while hunting and foraging supplemented diets in rural areas. Hunting rights were tightly controlled, with forests reserved for nobles, making venison rare for peasants. Slaughtering of pigs in autumn, documented in 1352 England, was an important seasonal ritual, as salted pork could sustain families through winter. Fish, particularly herring and cod, were consumed more frequently during fast days, dictated by the church calendar, as recorded in ecclesiastical directives from 14th century Flanders. Dairy products played a central role in sustaining energy, especially during colder months. Milk from cows, goats, or sheep was consumed fresh when available, or transformed into butter, cheese, or whey. Archaeological finds from northern France and Normandy indicate small-scale cheese production in peasant households, often creating soft, unripened curds for immediate consumption. Butter was churned by hand and used sparingly, both for cooking and as a spread on bread. These practices ensured that families maintained access to protein and fat, even when meat supplies were limited. Peasant cooking techniques were practical and labor-intensive. Stews and pottages simmered for hours over open hearths, allowing tough grains and legumes to soften while flavors developed. Baking was performed in small ovens or directly on hearthstones, while boiling and roasting were reserved for special occasions or larger household gatherings. Recipes were guided less by written texts and more by inherited knowledge, observation, and seasonal experience, creating a culinary tradition passed down through generations evidenced by medieval cookbooks like the 14th century form of curry. Meals reflected both survival and social context. Daily sustenance focused on efficiency and nourishment, while special occasions, holidays, saints' days, or communal harvest celebrations allowed for slightly richer foods, incorporating eggs, honey, or small amounts of meat. The communal nature of peasant life meant that food preparation and consumption were shared tasks, reinforcing family and village bonds. Even in modest cottages, meals were central to rhythm, routine, and household structure. Peasant cooking demonstrates the ingenuity and adaptability of rural households. Limited by climate, resources, and social hierarchy, peasants developed methods to maximize nutrition, preserve ingredients, and create variety from simple staples. From hearty oat porridge to vegetable stews enriched with herbs, everyday meals sustained families, shaped community life, and reflected broader agricultural and seasonal rhythms of medieval Europe. Through careful planning, practical skills, and intimate knowledge of the land, peasant households transformed modest ingredients into meals that were both sustaining and culturally significant, illustrating the resilience and creativity of medieval rural life. Communal cooking in medieval villages reflected both necessity and social cohesion. In peasant communities across Europe, households often lacked space, equipment, or resources to prepare certain foods individually, making shared kitchens, ovens, and hearths essential. Archaeological studies from 13th and 14th century villages, such as Warham-Percy in England, La Bastide in southern France, and San Gimignano in Italy, indicate that clusters of cottages were arranged around communal facilities, where villagers could bake bread, boil gruels, and prepare large meals for festivals, seasonal gatherings, or communal celebrations of births, marriages, and harvest milestones. These arrangements were not merely practical. They reinforced social bonds, regulated resources, and ensured equitable access to vital food supplies, creating a network of interdependence critical to survival. Bread production was a primary driver of communal kitchens. Villagers relied on shared stone or clay ovens, often maintained under the supervision of the local lord or elected community representatives. Records from 14th century northern France, such as the charters of Villeneuve-les-Avignon, show that oven usage was highly regulated, with designated baking days and fees charged to each household. Peasants transported prepared dough to these ovens, which were large enough to accommodate multiple loaves at once, allowing efficient baking and minimizing the risk of fires in small cottages. The collective nature of these ovens created opportunities for knowledge sharing, as bakers and housewives exchanged techniques for kneading, proofing, and shaping loaves. Beyond bread, communal kitchens supported the preparation of porridge, pottages, and other staples that required long cooking times or large cauldrons. Hearths in village halls or specialized communal buildings often featured multiple cooking spots, enabling simultaneous preparation of soups, gruels, and stews. In northern England, 14th century manorial records describe oat and barley gruels cooked in large cauldrons over open flames, providing daily sustenance for both laborers and children. Monastic influences were evident even in rural contexts, as techniques for boiling, seasoning, and layering ingredients mirrored those found in abbey cookbooks, such as the form of curry from late 14th century England. Villagers occasionally organized communal baking competitions or seasonal cook-offs to share skills and judge the best breads or pies. Seasonal rhythms dictated the flow of communal cooking. Spring and summer brought fresh vegetables, herbs, and early grains, while autumn required mass preparation of preserved foods such as salted meats, dried legumes, and stored root vegetables. Slaughtering of pigs in late autumn, documented in 1,352 English villages, was often coordinated communally, with households sharing labor, smokehouses, and storage facilities. Winter highlighted the necessity of cooperation, as stored grains, preserved dairy, and smoked meats became the primary sustenance. Shared kitchens allowed for more efficient use of fuel, continuous monitoring of long-simmering pottages, and equitable distribution of scarce food. Communal meals also marked social and religious events, Harvest festivals, saints' days, and local feasts relied on cooperative cooking, with villagers contributing ingredients, labor, or equipment. In 14th century France, records of Michaelmas and other harvest celebrations detail coordinated preparation of bread, pies, roasted meats, and dairy dishes for entire hamlets. In Italy, civic records from Siena and Florence note that communal kitchens supplied food for parish gatherings and charitable events, highlighting the intersection of ritual, charity, and sustenance. These shared culinary experiences reinforced hierarchy, local identity, and social solidarity, as wealthier villagers sometimes provided exotic ingredients or larger portions to demonstrate status and generosity. Storage and resource management were integral to communal kitchens. Granaries, cold rooms, and shared pantries protected grains, preserved meats, and dairy products from spoilage, pests, and moisture. Peasant households contributed to collective planning, ensuring that sufficient supplies were available throughout the year. Villagers often maintained written or oral records of contributions, usage, and scheduling, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of logistics and cooperative management despite limited literacy. Communal cooking exemplified the ingenuity and adaptability of medieval rural life. From shared ovens to large cauldrons, seasonal planning, coordinated labor, and festive collaborations, these practices allowed villagers to feed themselves efficiently while strengthening social cohesion. Food preparation was intertwined with cultural, religious, and economic life, demonstrating that even modest communities maintained complex culinary traditions. By pooling labor, knowledge, and resources, medieval villages transformed everyday sustenance into a shared experience that sustained not only the body, but also the fabric of communal life. In the medieval period, not all households had access to permanent hearths or elaborate kitchens, particularly in rural villages, traveling households, or military encampments. Improvised ovens and portable cooking methods allowed communities and individuals to prepare food efficiently under limited circumstances, demonstrating both ingenuity and adaptability. Archaeological and textual evidence from the 12th to 15th centuries reveals a variety of temporary cooking arrangements, from small clay ovens built near cottages to iron tripods and cauldrons used by traveling merchants, soldiers, and itinerant craftsmen. These solutions illustrate the flexibility required to sustain daily life outside permanent estates, as well as the ways communities creatively shared knowledge, resources, and labor to ensure reliable access to cooked meals. Temporary clay ovens were often constructed from locally sourced mud or clay mixed with straw. In 13th century northern France, peasant records describe small dome-shaped ovens built in courtyards or along village peripheries. These ovens could reach high temperatures suitable for baking bread, roasting meats, or cooking pies, and were often covered with removable lids or insulated with additional clay layers. Archaeological excavations in sites like Warham-Percy and La Bastide reveal remnants of such ovens, sometimes accompanied by ash pits and stone platforms that stabilized cooking vessels. Their construction and use reflect a combination of communal knowledge, seasonal necessity, and resource management, as families would often rebuild or repair ovens annually. Portable cooking devices were essential for households on the move or for specialized laborers. Iron tripods, cauldrons, and spit arrangements allowed food to be cooked over open fires with minimal infrastructure. Soldiers during campaigns, documented in the 14th century chronicles of Edward III's army, carried iron pots and spits for roasting meat, boiling grains, or preparing pottages. Traveling merchants and entertainers relied on similar tools, often bringing collapsible tripods or portable hearth frames that could be set up in marketplaces or inns. These mobile cooking systems allowed meals to be prepared in both urban and rural settings, connecting sustenance with mobility and trade, and enabling small groups to maintain communal dining even while traveling. Improvised ovens were also common in urban contexts. In 14th century Florence and Paris, small households without permanent hearths sometimes built temporary brick or clay ovens in courtyards, particularly during periods of festival cooking or large gatherings. City ordinances occasionally regulated these structures, specifying dimensions, placement, and fire safety, reflecting the tension between practical necessity and urban management. Oven rental systems also existed in towns such as Ghent and Siena, allowing residents without permanent ovens to access communal baking facilities for a fee. Such arrangements reveal the layered nature of medieval urban life, where innovation coexisted with legal and social structures. Portable cooking extended beyond ovens. Hearth pans, cauldrons suspended from hooks, and shallow grills were widely used to roast, boil, or fry foods over open flames. In northern England, manorial accounts from the 1,350 seconds document the use of tripods and cauldrons for preparing gruels and soups for laborers in the fields, demonstrating the integration of mobility with daily sustenance. Spice use and seasoning often adapted to portable methods. Herbs could be crushed directly into cauldrons, while salt and imported spices were carefully rationed to enhance flavor without complicating transport. These practices also reinforced communal knowledge, as techniques were passed along through apprenticeships, family instruction, and shared labor. The reliance on improvised and portable cooking highlights the medieval understanding of heat management, fuel efficiency, and food safety. Temporary ovens required careful construction to reach adequate temperatures without collapsing, while cauldrons and spits demanded constant attention to prevent scorching. Households and traveling parties developed strategies for storing embers, managing wind and rain, and protecting ingredients from pests, reflecting practical knowledge gained through observation and experience rather than formal instruction. Improvised ovens and portable cooking were not only practical, but also socially and culturally significant. They allowed peasants, itinerants, soldiers, and urban residents to maintain culinary routines despite spatial, economic, or environmental constraints. From courtyard clay ovens to portable iron cauldrons, these methods ensured that food could be prepared, shared, and enjoyed even in temporary or challenging conditions. The innovation behind these devices demonstrates the adaptability of medieval communities, balancing survival, social cohesion, and culinary tradition. By the late medieval period, European cooking had evolved into a complex interplay of tradition, experimentation, and regional identity. Culinary practices were informed by centuries of accumulated knowledge, spanning local and imported ingredients, seasonal cycles, and social hierarchies. Recipes, household manuals, and monastic treatises preserved methods, while encouraging experimentation, fostering innovation in both technique and flavor. The legacies of these practices persisted well into the Renaissance, influencing not only aristocratic banquets, but also the emerging urban culinary culture, which blended local resourcefulness with international influences, from trade networks stretching from the Levant to the Spice Islands. Cookbooks from the 14th and 15th centuries, such as the English form of Curie and the Italian Libro de Arte Culinaria, demonstrate a sophisticated awareness of ingredient combinations, preparation methods, and presentation. These texts reveal that medieval cooks were adept at layering flavors, balancing sweet, sour, bitter, and savory components, and employing both subtle and elaborate techniques. Honey, vinegar, and imported spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were paired with locally grown herbs and vegetables to create dishes that were simultaneously nourishing, preservable, and aesthetically pleasing. Even in peasant households, culinary innovation occurred through adaptations of recipes to suit seasonal availability, limited resources, or regional preferences, demonstrating that creativity was not confined to the elite. Advances in kitchen technology also contributed to culinary innovation. The development of mechanical turnspits, more efficient ovens, and specialized cooking implements enabled cooks to handle larger quantities of food with precision. In urban centers, communal kitchens and guild-regulated bakeries encouraged experimentation with bread, pastries, and spiced meats, while noble households employed teams of specialized cooks to create elaborate feasts. Evidence from 15th century Florence, Paris, and London shows that new techniques including layered pies, stuffed meats, and intricate sauces became increasingly popular, reflecting both technical mastery and the desire to impress guests with visual and gustatory sophistication. Trade and cultural exchange further expanded the culinary repertoire. Spices, sugar, citrus, and exotic fruits reached European markets from distant lands, prompting both experimentation and the integration of new flavors into traditional dishes. Monasteries, often responsible for both agricultural innovation and manuscript preservation, acted as centers for culinary knowledge, recording recipes while also introducing techniques like cheese aging, fermentation, and the careful balancing of flavor and preservation. These methods were adopted and adapted across social classes, illustrating the permeability of culinary knowledge despite strict social hierarchies. Culinary innovation was not purely aesthetic. Preservation techniques, salting, smoking, drying, and pickling remained essential, particularly for peasant and urban households, where long-term storage was necessary to survive winter months. Innovations in flavoring often worked hand in hand with preservation, allowing cooks to transform otherwise monotonous staples into varied and appealing dishes. For nobles, experimentation extended to the combination of luxury ingredients with traditional staples, producing meals that were as much a display of wealth and power as they were sustenance. The social dimension of cooking also shaped innovation. Banquets, religious feasts, and communal celebrations demanded both volume and creativity, driving cooks to develop new recipes, presentation methods, and service techniques. Guild regulations and apprenticeship systems ensured that knowledge was transmitted systematically, while household accounts and inventories provide evidence of experimentation with both ingredients and methods. By the late 15th century, culinary innovation had become a marker of status, education, and cosmopolitan taste, distinguishing households and regions through style, flavor, and presentation. The legacy of medieval cooking is thus twofold: a foundation of practical, seasonally driven techniques, combined with a tradition of innovation that embraced experimentation, trade, and aesthetic refinement. From humble pottages and preserved staples to elaborate banquets of spiced meats and pastries, medieval cooks demonstrated an understanding of nutrition, preservation, and sensory appeal that would inform European cuisine for centuries. Their work reflects not only the daily rhythms of life but also the aspirations, creativity, and adaptability of communities negotiating the constraints of environment, resources, and social structure. Ultimately, medieval cooking laid the groundwork for modern culinary traditions, combining resourcefulness with artistry and practicality with experimentation. The innovations developed in hearths, ovens, and communal kitchens across Europe highlight a sophisticated culinary culture in which preservation, flavor, presentation, and social signaling coexisted, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to influence European gastronomy and the cultural value of food today.